They stole from me for months before I ever decided to steal anything back, and when I say stole, I don't mean a couple apples falling off a branch. I mean walking into my orchard at night, filling crates with fruit I'd nursed for 30 years, and watching it leave my land like it belonged to someone else. So yeah, I sent 40 pigs to a wedding reception, but that's the middle of the story, the part people laugh at or call me a monster for, depending on where their sympathies land. Let me start at the beginning. My name's Daniel Mercer. I bought this plot outside Briar Glen when I was 28, a stubborn stretch of red clay and rolling hill that would become an orchard, Ashme's Kernel and Wine Sap and Northern Spy and Arkansas Black, 23 varieties that taste like memory if you've ever had them at the right moment. I planted most of those trees with my own hands, grafted cuttings from coffee cans my grandfather kept pruned in the snow, cursed at the sun when it turned mean in April. Farming is a lifetime stitched to a calendar, a rhythm of hope and worry you learn to live inside. The orchard isn't an investment to me, it's the part of my life that kept its shape when everything else blurred. On the other side of my southern fence sits Hawthorne Estate, marble columns, manicured greens, a lake with swans, someone imported because swans are picturesque on brochures. They do weddings and corporate retreats and charity galas. Their centerpieces are worth more than the truck I learned to drive in. For years we coexisted. Folks took photos with my trees in the background. Brides smiled and asked if the orchard could be lit up at dusk. If they asked politely, I'd sell them a few crates. I believed in simple courtesies. Then they hired Preston Hale. Preston wore city like a uniform, tailored jackets, boots that had never seen mud, a smile that cost something. He introduced himself one warm afternoon leaning against my fence like we were supposed to be old friends. "Daniel," he said, "we'd love to feature your orchard in our fall events. It's the perfect authentic touch." Authentic, he said, like authenticity was a prop you could rent. He offered me $2 a bushel for wholesale, $2 as if the labor and the grafting and the winters and the summers didn't count. I told him I sold retail at 15 a bushel at the market. He gave me the exposure line, "We'll feature you on the menu cards," and the kind of smile that expects gratitude. A week later, I started noticing fruit missing along the fence. At first, a few apples, easy to dismiss, dear kid's a bad night. Then, whole limbs looked picked clean, deliberate like the work of hands that had made plans. I put up trail cameras, not because I'm conspiratorial, but because farmers learn to observe before you escalate. 3 nights in, I sat at my kitchen table with bourbon and the footage on my phone. There they were, Preston's people, a van with the Hawthorne logo, men in black polos, with flashlights moving through a section of fence they'd loosened beforehand, filling crates from my best trees, loading them into the van like they'd bought the orchard at auction. My hands shook, not from fear, but from a hot anger I hadn't felt since my wife died. Mary Ann used to joke about my pigs more than she teased me. "Danny, if you loved me like you love those hogs, I'd be oinking by now," she'd say, and we'd both laugh until it hurt. She'd been gone 5 years then, cancer slow as winter. After she left, chores kept me steady, the coffee at dawn, the dogs at my heels, the ritual of walking rows, and now someone had decided my work was scenery for a photo op and nothing more. I drove to the estate the next morning in boots and a shirt still smelling faintly of fertilizer. Preston was reviewing floral samples with a bride and her mother. He excused himself with that same trained smile. I played the footage in a side hallway. He watched without changing his face. "Sometimes surplus produce gets shared," he said when it ended. Surplus, that word like a slap. I told him the math. I told him how much fruit they'd taken. He adjusted his cuff and offered me the $2 deal again like he could buy my silence with a handshake. Then he said the line that stuck, "Litigation can get expensive for everyone." He was betting on my exhaustion on the town's tendency to forgive polished sponsors. Hawthorne donated to the Little League, to the county fundraisers. Preston knew people. If I made a scene, I'd be the cranky farmer making trouble for a local business. I lowered my voice and gave him a week to pay fair market value for what they'd already taken. And for that 1 week, nothing changed except the taking got bolder. Crates vanished from the storage shed. Someone evidently had a key. I caught one kid in the act a few nights later, barely 22, shaky as a fawn under the lights. "Mr. Hale said it was arranged," he stammered when I cornered him. He looked like a kid who'd swallowed a lie whole and was choking on the truth. That was a twist. I didn't expect a staff-fed a story that made theft feel like part of a job. It made me angrier to see someone else's livelihood handed out as whimsy. Then Preston's daughter's wedding got announced, the event of the season, 300 guests, 7-course dinner, a cake flown in from New York, because money can buy absurdity. My neighbor Earl came by and said they're pulling out all the stops, like that could soften the moral geometry of the thing. The week before the wedding, someone cut the fence again deeper into my orchard this time. That wasn't a partnership. That was trespass. I thought about calling the sheriff. I did in the back of my head. Small towns have politics. Sponsors sit on committees. I dug up the law books in my mind, but more and more I felt the quiet harden into something else, a clear, cold decision that if my property could be treated like a stage set, it deserved a finale. The pigs were already part of the farm, large, slow-scheming animals that know routine, like a human knows breath. I'd started raising heritage hogs when apple prices crashed, a practical move that turned into affection. Mangalitsis with curly coats and old spot Gloucesters that would nuzzle your hand like a tenant. They know my truck, they know the sound of the feed bucket, and they know sugar, the way a compass knows north. I fed them, and they fed me back with the steady business of being. On the day of Leia's wedding, the air turned that bright, absurd October blue, the kind of light photographers love. The estate smelled of roasted things and butter, and yes, apples. I watched from the rise at the edge of my property because even if I didn't want to be part of someone else's narrative, I wanted to see it honestly. Their live video was already online. Locally sourced heirloom apples from Mercer Orchard. The caption crowed my name. My trees, my labor used to accent someone else's brand. That took something out of me. Marianne's voice whispered caution. Danny, don't burn bridges you can't rebuild. And for a second I pictured fixing a fence and ducking into court and letting a judge decide. Then I pictured Preston in that hallway calling my life surplus. Bridges can be built, but sometimes the other side burns them first. I opened the pasture gate. 40 hogs poured through like a myth come true. They shredded a decorative hedge like tissue, which is to say, they paid no attention to gowns or table settings. For a breath less than a breath, the music and the laughter kept going. Then a pig launched itself at the dessert table and the wedding's careful world dissolved in white frosting and flying tarts. People screamed in that high, sharp way people do when their expectations get reprogrammed into panic. Champagne-toppled tuxedos were trotted around like flags. A bridesmaid clambered onto a table and looked at me like a weather event had come for her. You can call that chaos. You can call it justice. From where I stood safe on my side of the fence with my hands on a post, it felt like a conversation finally being heard at full volume. Preston ran toward the hedgerow in the kind of panic only people accustomed to order know. "You're insane," he shouted. "They must have smelled something." I told him because it was true, pigs follow their noses. He opened his mouth to say, I orchestrated it to accuse, and I let the silence hang. If he pushed that accusation, then the question of where the food came from would push back, and that wasn't a fight he wanted in front of his daughter's shattered cake. The sheriff called that evening. They'd had reports of livestock on the property. "Did you intentionally release them?" the deputy asked. I let the silence do its work. Then I said honestly that creatures sometimes find weaknesses in hedges. There was a pause, the kind that counts. "We're looking into claims that produce was used without permission," he said finally. I told him I had footage, months of it. He cleared his throat and said, "We'll be in touch." The videos went viral, hogs crashing a luxury reception, and the internet did what the internet does, split into outrage memes and cottage analyses. Insurance investigators smelled blood in the water. Guests with twisted ankles and a broken wrist filed claims. Suddenly the story wasn't just about the spectacle. Someone checked the sourcing notes. My footage found its way to reporters who like a seam of scandal and to neighbors who'd quietly been annoyed by the estate's take-it-for-granted air. Once the cameras showed Preston's staff harvesting my orchard, the narrative flipped. They called it poetic payback. I called it messy and necessary. Preston resigned 3 days later. The insurance denied the estate's claim, citing unauthorized use of stolen goods. 2 board members showed up at my farmhouse with careful smiles. "We value our relationship with the local agricultural community," they said. And the offer was better than I'd expected, a contract to buy the rest of my harvest at premium pricing. an upfront payment compensation for documented losses. I signed not because I was magnanimous, but because I was tired. Tired of sleeping with cameras and counting losses. Tired of the quieter indignities that add up to a life rewritten by someone else's hashtag. After everything, the orchard settled back into its seasons. Morning coffee, the dog at my heels, pruning that keeps you honest. The hedge is reinforced now, practical, ugly, necessary. Hawthorne sources produced through written contracts. My pigs are heavier and somehow a little wiser. They get their own legend now, a story told at cocktail parties with a grin about the farm next door with a mind of its own. They use that legend to sell experiences, which is an odd sort of revenge. Here's the messy, honest lesson, the thing that landed on me like frost after a long summer. For a long time, I thought being the bigger person was about swallowing your pride, about trusting that the world would reward quiet, honest work. Sometimes it does. Often it doesn't. Quiet can be mistaken for weakness. People who can lean on power and money take advantage of that silence because it is convenient. Pushing back can be ugly. It can hurt innocent people. It can make you look small and vindictive and at times petty. But there are moments when silence becomes the very permission that allows taking to continue. In those moments, you have a choice: continue to be the scenery or make yourself inconvenient. I'm not proud of every step I took. I regret the bride's ruined dress in a way that hits like cold water. I regret that my solution risked harm to people who were probably just trying to celebrate. I wonder in the quiet if I could have done it another way: gather community evidence, go to the paper lawyer up, and make a cleaner case. Maybe I could have. But I also remember the hallway Preston's smirk, the way he called my life's work surplus, and I remember what it felt like when consequences finally landed. So here's what I want to know from you, and I mean really know: was I justified, or did pride push me too far? If someone with influence takes from you, lies about it, and leans on connections to silence you, how far is too far when you finally push back? Drop a comment and tell me your story. Have you ever been steamrolled by someone with more money or better connections? And did you stay quiet or fight back? If you think small farmers deserve a louder voice when bigger players try to write them out of the story, hit like, share this, and tell a friend who understands what it means to fight for what's yours. Because sometimes the only thing stronger than a polished narrative is 40 hungry pigs.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video. Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.